Hello and welcome back to the Free Speed Podcast, your go-to podcast for navigating fitness and life with purpose. We're your host, Natasha Bozic.
And I'm Calvin Fogler.
Today, we are on episode 16, and our episode is going to be about the average athlete relationship and how sport has changed our dynamic.
Yeah, really, the reason we wanted to talk about this today was just because we've been kind of reflecting on our relationship and how we've evolved through working out over the last 4 or 5 years. And ultimately, we've gone through some significant transitions personally in just our own kind of styles of training and what we prioritize and ultimately kind of what we value. I think a lot of people get into the gym after sport to just look good. Personally, I did the same thing. Like, I was trying to definitely be a better athlete, but I definitely wanted to look better in the mirror. And people go different ways with that. And I think some people want to compete in bodybuilding. Some people want to compete in sports. Some people don't even want to compete at all.
Yeah,
and
some people just want to work out just to feel good, and that's also okay. But yeah, basically, our relationship has gone through many changes in the last few years, specifically just in terms of the way we train and the way we view life. And we thought it would just be beneficial to kind of do an episode on it in case any of you guys are going through the same thing or maybe want to take that step and make a change.
Yeah, I'm excited for this episode because I think a lot of people or anyone who's listening to this episode is likely training for some sort of athletic event. And so whether your partner or your significant other also shares a passion for fitness or they don't, then there's a way that you can kind of relate to this one way or another. And I think a lot of people underappreciate how important physical activity and athletic kind of training plays a role in relationships. I think it's significant. And if people don't really respect or understand how much it means to somebody, then it can cause issues as well. So
yeah, definitely.
Before we get into today's episode, though, why don't we catch up with what's going on in our lives recently? So, Tash, what have you been up to in your life that is worth talking about?
Why are you laughing?
No, I'm just laughing because it's like you could just say whatever you want.
Oh, so what's new with me? I have been just trying to get over a cold, popping cold and flu pills the last couple of days. I feel a little bit better now, but it's definitely like you guys have experienced this. Like, definitely, it's just the first thing when you wake up in the morning, you feel terrible, and then you take the pill, and then you're like, I don't know, an hour later, and then you feel better, and then at the end of the day, it like wears off, and you feel like shit again. But I'm just trying to stay positive and hope that with just enough like rest and recovery that I can just easily get through it. But it is kind of annoying.
I think the one thing though that I've been telling Tash to maybe look out for is I think part of the reason you might feel this way is because you're mouth breathing predominantly during your sleep. Mm-hmm. And I think people who mouth breathe can probably relate to it more because I don't exactly feel that sick when I wake up, so I don't know exactly what's going on, but I do notice that every time you wake up your mouth is just like wide open.
And my throat is sore like almost every day, and it's we want to do an episode specifically on sleep and like mouth breathing later on, but yeah, it's definitely something I need to work on, that's for sure.
Yeah, like an episode on like the little things that you don't really realize make a huge impact.
Yeah.
What else has been going on?
I don't know, wrist injury came back a little bit, so I'm just trying to work around that, not put too much pressure on it when I'm training. But yeah, I feel good. I feel like hopefully the next couple weeks will be good before Hyrox in Brisbane.
Yeah.
March 2nd.
Well, what I think is interesting, and anyone listening, and I'm just going to talk about how training and like you have your training set out for a week, and I think it's important to realize that like how your job and what you do on the day-to-day basis, how it affects your training you shouldn't overlook it. And I know Tash and I both stand when we work for like 6 to 7 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just interesting how I don't even really think about how it's maybe benefiting me or not and affecting my training later that day. But I feel like people don't realize like how many hours, whether you're sitting or whatever, however you're acting at work, how that impacts like your body, your joints, and your health. And just like kind of keeping that at the forefront of your mind when you think about, I'm doing like 15 kilometers of running today and I walked like 20,000 steps, or I was standing all day, just like how that affects your body rather than just laying down and having a full rest day or just chilling horizontally. You know what I mean? It's just interesting how I find like that volume doesn't get accounted for at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. But it's just life, I guess.
That is life.
Yeah.
And if you can train and maintain through your work, I mean, you're doing the right things. So
okay, anyways, back to our episode. The average athlete relationship. So first, we're going to set the scene. Let's take it back to when we met. What year was that?
2018. It would have been the fall of 2018 because we graduated in 2019, the end of 2019.
Right.
Yeah.
So we met in high school, and we both did this business leadership program, which was basically just like a bunch of kids from a different school that kind of went off of campus, like off.
Yeah. So
off site. It's very different.
The way I explain it is like there's 6 high schools in the city we grew up, and kids from all 6 high schools could go to this one program, this one business leadership program that was focused for people who wanted to have like an experiential
learning.
Experiential learning and ultimately probably go into business in life. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the connection.
Yeah. But yeah, so we met there. Weren't really good friends at all. We were just like in the same class.
Yeah, we were in the same class.
There was like 50 of us though, so it was like quite a big class. Anyways,
it's funny when anyone asks us about how we met, I start the story with like high school, and they immediately go, "Oh, you guys are high school sweethearts," and I'm like, "No, no."
So, really quickly, a couple years later, or how many years later?
It was. Well, it would have been a year or 2 years later. Yeah, so 2 years later is when we started dating, but a year later is when COVID hit.
Yeah, so we met at actually a gym that we were both working out at, or not met. We like rekindled our friendship at this gym because like we knew each other from high school, but weren't really close. But then we saw each other at the gym, so obviously we said hi. COVID hit. We were working out together quite a bit, and
lockdown.
Calvin
and
had
also
a
lockdown.
home
So
gym.
yeah, so lockdown hits, and in Canada, if you were there, you would know that it was like back and forth, lockdown on and off, and so this would have been the summer of 2020, yeah. Summer of 2020 when it was like back and forth lockdowns, and there was this one gym, World Gym in Guelph that was willing to like stay open for a maximum of 10 people and you had to book in. But Tash was so desperate to work out that she ended up switching to the gym that I was training at. And so that's kind of how I ran into her and just like went up to her and said hi because I hadn't seen her in like almost a year. And from there, we went into a lockdown and I was just like, screw this. I'm going to the fitness depot and I'm buying my own equipment because fitness at that point was just so important to me. And I knew if I bought some barbells and some plates that I would have them for the rest of my life. And so my really good friend from back home at the time, we built these like squat and bench press rack out of 2x4s and concrete. So if you can imagine just like wood and 2x4s together. And then one level was for bench press, one level was for your squat height. And
it worked pretty well.
And I had a barbell, some plates, a few dumbbells. Tash brought over kettlebells. And so then we started kind of training in my basement as just friends though. And that's kind of where it started, just friends. And Tash was doing like her glute focus work, and I was kind of just training for being athletic. But at that point, I had already decided that I wanted to row. And so this was the fall of when I was supposed to be out in California. However, because of lockdown, I was still at home. So I was doing a lot of rowing and like lower body strength focus work. And Tash was doing more of your glute style focus stuff. And then we would kind of train here and there together. Like we would do some sessions together, but we kind of did our own thing, I'm pretty sure, back then, parallel.
We were working out together quite a bit.
Yeah.
Anyways, moving on. We basically both were into just strength stuff. So mostly just bodybuilding, lifting weights at this time. And basically, I grew up without playing sports. So basically, I never experienced the idea of team sports or the concept of competition or anything like that. So that's kind of how we're just trying to like set the scene for you guys, is that like Calvin grew up playing a lot of sports.
Yeah.
And I didn't. But we did kind of just both meet in terms of just working out just to like better ourselves.
Fitness ultimately brought us together, but from very different ways of getting there. Just like Tash said, like back when I was in high school, I remember like some days I would wake up to go to rugby practice in the morning, and then after school there would be another like badminton or tennis or something, and then I would go from that to another sport, and then like later that night I'd go to hockey. So I was just always just the type of person that wanted to play team sports all the time. It was funny, like my brother played in trombone. He was a big music guy. And I remember like in my head I was like, I really want to be good at music, but I just didn't care. Like I didn't care enough to like sit down every day and practice the saxophone. Like it just wasn't interesting. But if you told me that I could play sports for hours and hours, that was like, tell me when and where kind of thing. So I was super grateful that I had parents that were also supportive of like bringing me just like from place to place, which made it possible ultimately. Like I don't think people realize until they're older how much time and effort it takes for your parents to like to travel from different city to city to play like youth hockey or even any sport for that matter.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, basically grew up without playing sports, and the concept of competition just didn't mean much to me. I didn't really know like what it felt like to win anything. Like I didn't really care about that, and I kind of just worked out in terms of it, like enjoying the process and just for overall health kind of thing. So obviously Calvin was a D1 athlete. He was rowing in all 4 years of university.
But before that, I want to explain, like when I was a kid, and I think a lot of boys specifically feel this way, is when you play sports as a kid, you idolize professional athletes. And because I played so many sports, like all I wanted in life was to become a pro athlete. And I think that's so important to like recognize anyone who played sports as a young kid, usually at some point was like they dreamt of becoming a professional athlete. And the funny thing about it is like the belief I had in myself to become a pro athlete has never, like I've never lost it, if that makes sense. And I think a lot of people get to a point where their priorities change and they kind of pivot and they decide like, this isn't, like I don't really have what it takes, or they've had a coach that's discouraged them, or they get to a point where they just kind of give up and they lose interest. And I think how sports have been different, at least for me, is I've just always pivoted to something that I can invest the next whatever future it is in, and like at the hopes of becoming the best at that sport. And I mean, a great example though is like, I want to be a great runner at this point. Like I had this goal to set to run a 3-hour marathon. With that being said, I have no sort of capacity to ever be a professional runner. And so I know that there's a lot of things that I realized, and even rowing for that matter, when I rowed in university, is I went in my first year of university, and the newbie gains, like the beginner gains, were very quick. And I used my athleticism to get myself to like one of the top rowing machine results on the team, like the 2,000 meter test. I was in the top 3 on the team in my freshman year. And it's just interesting because I remember thinking like, I'm going to become an Olympic rower. Like that was like, I was like, this is my path. Like, this is where I'm ahead of people. And it's just funny because you get to a genetic potential, you get to a limit in things where you're like, you just start squeezing a lemon that's already been squeezed. And I just remember that I was so naive to like the levels to the sport. And so at this point, I think my best potential in ever becoming like high level would be Hyrox, just because like where I am at and how I'm much more of a well-rounded person and more of a hybrid style than like a specific one-trick wonder. But that's kind of just my background with kind of how dreaming of becoming a pro athlete and realizing can't become a pro hockey player. Like I just haven't gotten the opportunities, wasn't good enough. And I just pivoted. I pivoted until I found myself in an individual sport, because that's a beautiful thing. And I think you've seen this with Olympic lifters, is like when you have an individual sport, the potential is unlimited, although sometimes it feels like you're beating your head against a wall to try and become the best version of yourself. So,
Right.
Tash, do you want to talk about your experience in sports?
Yeah. So basically this contrast that we had of me like not understanding what it felt like to be an athlete and grow up playing sports, and Calvin having the complete opposite experience, that kind of was just very interesting. And I think in terms of the average, like me being average and him being the athlete, it did prevent us from butting heads at first in our relationship. And it also allowed us to definitely appreciate our differences. And but yeah, I never really truly understood what it meant to compete and train for performance. So yeah, so
why don't you talk about the challenge?
yeah.
Because I feel like was a moment where you maybe saw a little bit into like how intense I took just like things that to some people they would consider it not matter. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people could be like, oh, why would you do that?
So back when we first started dating, Calvin did this challenge called the 4x4 by 48 challenge. And if you're not familiar, it is a challenge that David Goggins created where you run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours. And obviously I was a supportive girlfriend. I was like, amazing, like you go and do that. But I never understood why he wanted to do it. I never understood why people would put themselves through that much pain, suffering, and just like uncomfortableness. And I never understood it. And I feel like that was a very pivotal time reflecting back now, because now I get it. And I get why you did it, and I understand why doing hard shit is important. Mm-hmm. And basically, yeah, so
I think to that point, though, what's so beautiful is people underestimate how hard things make other things in life seem less serious or less difficult. And it's like this, like when your hard is something that like you had to suffer through, that when you go through something that's the same or similar or even anything less, then you're like, I've been here before. I've suffered mentally through things that are way more challenging. I think that's what, like when I did that, so I did the Goggins challenge 6 months after we started dating. And then about a year and a half later, that next summer after, I did a half Ironman, and that half Ironman changed my perspective of what hard was for a long time. And I still think that was the hardest thing I've done to this day, because of how mentally, like I also didn't train for it well. I didn't fuel properly. I was bonking in this race after mile like 4, right? I had a half marathon and I was a fifth of the way through, and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to finish. But it just completely reshaped my ability to, like, if I can do that, if I can finish this, like what's something that's like only an hour long or a 2-hour workout, you know what I mean? Like, it just completely changed my ability with my relationship with hard.
Yeah. So, and at this point, when Calvin did his half Ironman, I still was only kind of just training for bodybuilding and aesthetics. So I never really truly understood what it meant to be doing these events for performance. And obviously, yeah, I was super supportive, but there's something about being truly able to understand what it's actually like.
You have to live it.
You have to be immersed in that lifestyle to actually understand. And that's why I feel like a lot of people that I know from back home and family and stuff, they'll never understand what it's like to want to put yourself through hard shit and do things like this. But anyways, back to our story. So the early days, obviously I was a non-athlete dating an athlete, and my initial perspective on fitness and training was that I obviously was just training just to feel good, but it was mostly just for aesthetics as well. Like, I just wanted to look good, have big glutes, have a toned body. I wasn't running at all. And if you guys know this, in high school, I really hurt my knee running in like a personal fitness class, because obviously we weren't trained very well, and the teacher was like, okay, go run a 5K. I don't think you understand that, like, having not run ever in your life and then being told to go run a 5K, like, that's a very big jump in mileage, and you should never do that. So obviously my knee, basically my doctor told me I could never run again. And ever since I started kind of running a couple years ago, I can't believe I'm at the place I am now. But back then I didn't run. I only did Stairmaster, and even doing the Stairmaster would hurt my knees, which is actually crazy to think about. So the fact that I've built up so much knee strength and like rehabbed everything is actually crazy. And
I just want to say something. So for anyone listening and has a knee problem, Tash had this thing where they said it was a floating patella.
Yeah, so
her kneecap was floating, and that's kind of the issue she was dealing with. And so if you had that issue,
I still have it.
Yeah. So if
it's
you
like
had,
it's just like part of your body.
Yeah,
It's
if you have this issue, just know Tash is like a great example of someone who's still been able to train and work around. So if you have that issue, definitely know that like someone else is in the same boat as you.
But it's also because of years and years of strength training and actually learning how to, work around it. So it does take time. However, basically I just saw workouts as a way to just stay in shape. And I didn't really understand why athletes and people training for performance would feel like guilty about missing a workout and stuff like that. And fast forward to now, it's the complete opposite. Like, I totally understand it. So when it comes to dating someone like me who doesn't really fully understand, or didn't really fully understand the athlete lifestyle, like, did that ever make you like frustrated or anything?
I don't think it was frustrated, but I think there was definitely a disconnect sometimes when I would be so immersed in just rowing every day, all day. And I would spend so many hours surrounded by my teammates who we would be talking about rowing for just hours and hours. And the amount of pressure and kind of standards that we had to hit, and we always talked about going sub 6 minutes, and like if we didn't, then it would be kind of a letdown for our top boat. And I just think that sort of internal seriousness and pressure meant rowing was like all consuming and very important. And I don't think maybe you realize like how much pressure was on everybody to perform.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
I think,
because I've never experienced that. So
and I think I just like, I try not to take that into like when we would talk. I would just kind of be like, yeah, like the race was good and we lost or we won or we were this far off. But like, I think too, just spectating rowing, you don't see the hours and hours that goes into it. And if anyone's seen the recent movie, The Boys in the Boat. So The Boys in the Boat is a movie that came out this past year about a University of Washington rowing team. And if you haven't seen the movie, it's a great movie. But I will say, if you haven't been around rowing, it doesn't really depict the reality of all the hours and time that they train, and that racing is really a very small part of the sport. And the hours and hours of sacrifice of training that goes into performing is kind of lost. And I think that's kind of the same sometimes as people who don't row. When you just are watching, or if you're not maybe like the parent of someone or very close, you don't still really understand how much suffering and sacrifice and the pressure kind of internally to perform. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I felt was maybe there was just like a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. So the moment that I started seeing training a little bit differently, I have to take you guys back to the summer of 2023. And this summer, if you guys didn't know, Calvin and I were in a long distance relationship. So we hadn't seen each other for a long time. So we decided that I would go and live with him for the summer in San Jose. So we drove my little Hyundai Venue to San Jose. And did a road trip across the US.
It was awesome. That was, I think this road trip, like if you have the time to plan a road trip across the US or Canada, ideally during the summer months mainly too, it's one of the best things that we've ever done. Yeah, as long as you can put up with somebody for 7 days.
It was really hard sitting down for that long and driving. And
but being able to split the drives was like necessary.
That was nice. And honestly, the hardest part was probably just finding enough time to work out and stuff.
Yeah.
But anyways, so we were in San Jose, living in San Jose. Calvin was working at an F45, and we met, or Calvin had already known these fit moms, but I had recently just met them. And basically, these moms were just insanely fit, like 8-pack abs.
Yeah, this was crazy.
Went to world championships in Hyrox. Okay?
I still remember I started working at this F45, and my boss, who was an ex-professional hockey player, Devin, he's one of the greatest people I've ever met.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
He had this F45 full of just like people who loved fitness. And I think that was like the best thing ever, because I was just surrounded by people who were not only like just athletes, but like looking to challenge themselves day in and day out, and like looking for new things and races and things like that. And just like, and that's how like this woman, Kendall, who's an absolute beast, got into Hyrox and found out about it, and then kind of inspired almost like the whole gym or a lot of people at the gym to eventually get into it,
Yeah.
like within the last couple of years. So
Yeah. So basically she kind of introduced me to it. And back then, like, Hyrox wasn't really a big thing per se, especially in Canada, because there wasn't even ever a Hyrox race in Canada.
It wasn't big at all. I think you could
in
look
the
at the numbers,
they
though.
had a few races in the US,
But still,
it
they were
wasn't very
one
big.
day events.
Yeah,
And
wasn't very
if you
big.
know Hyrox now, they're all sold out. They're almost all 2-day events now. Even some like in the UK are like 4 days apparently, which is insane.
Yeah.
Insane.
So this summer they were like, oh, you should do it, whatever, because they were doing Dallas, which is in November in 2023. And I was like, oh, I don't know, like, I've never run before, so it's kind of new to me. But then one day I was like, you know what, why not? Signed up for this Hyrox race in Dallas. No going back, because it was in Dallas and I had to book my flights and everything. So I had about 2 months of training, and let me tell you, when I first started, I couldn't do a single wall ball, okay? I had no idea how to do a wall ball. I have a video on my Instagram that, like, shows my progress, which is actually crazy. So just so you guys know, like, I didn't always know how to train the way I do. Like, I started from the bottom, just like a lot of people do. So that's kind of when I started seeing training differently, because when you start training for purpose and for performance, it is just a complete different ball game. Like, you need to make sure you're eating enough food, recovering enough for your runs. Just, it's completely different. And I feel like my mindset shifted also, just from wanting to train for aesthetics to now training for performance. And I also, that summer, saw how focused Calvin was in terms of his rowing, because he was working a 9 to 5 that whole summer, and on top of that would be rowing every single night for 40 whatever days, right?
Yeah, so this was the summer before my senior year, my 4th year of university in rowing, and I had started this job at a spine device where they would fuse your lower back spine and help people with low back pain. And I was working that 9 to 5, and my one goal that summer was to be able to gain weight and eat in a surplus to hit my target weight, which was insane. Max.
If you guys see photos from this time, it's actually crazy, because back then, like, I just thought that's how he looked, and we were recently looking back at photos, and it's actually insane, like, how puffy your face was, and like, it's not that you were like big back then.
No. But I was compared to now, because right now I weigh 30 pounds less than what I did. That's
crazy.
Which is insane. 30 pounds. And it wasn't like, there was definitely more muscle, but like, it was mostly just like kind of just 30 pounds spread pretty much evenly around my body. Mm-hmm. And the whole point of, there's a lot of reasons why I did that for rowing specifically, just because I knew the guys on the team that were heavier were pushing more watts and like developing better. And I knew that for the test and the standard that our coach had set at the beginning of the year, that it was going to be super important for me to have a huge buffer of weight, so that when we ramped up training, that I wouldn't, like, I could lose 5 to 10 pounds and still be like where I wanted to be. Because I knew whenever cardio got like increased significantly, that I would lose weight, because it's just so hard to eat enough calories. Mm-hmm. And so really, though, what Tash was talking about was, I was working this 9 to 5, and I did all the strength training up until 48 days before the rowing season, and really kind of this rowing erg test, which was a 6K. And my coach let us know at the end of the season prior that if we weren't at this standard, the 1 minute and 45 second per 500 meter split, which is a sub 21 minute 6K on the rowing machine, that we wouldn't be on the water and that we wouldn't compete. And so it was definitely a kick in the ass for me because I knew he was serious, and I knew that if I didn't hit that standard, it would put me behind the 8 ball. It would put me in a very poor position to be in the top boat. And ultimately that year in 2024 or 2023 into 2024, like that was all I cared about. And that was my number one goal, was to be in the top boat. And it's hard to like look back and be like, damn, that was like my only actual goal, but it was like, that was my only focus, and I would do anything it took. And so ultimately, like, I think you watch me after every day of work, I'd come meet you at the gym, and I would do my rowing workout from like 5:30 to 7:30, and then we would go home. Mm-hmm. And this 48-day plan ultimately led me to the day that we did the test, and everything paid off. And I think that's like what I've realized is like when you are serious and you fully commit mentally, and like you actually see how this training will lead me to this result, it takes away a lot of the pressure, in the sense that like if you built the confidence in the days leading up to it, then when it comes to the race day, it's like the work's already been done.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it's difficult though for a lot of people.
That's how I feel even about, like half marathons and stuff. Like the hard work that is mm-hmm. done is the whole training block leading up to it.
Exactly. And if you leave too much for surprise, then you've let yourself down in a sense, and that like you can't really expect a miracle to happen if you've never prepared.
For sure.
I think that's kind of just the focus I think that you might have seen is like...
It was just inspiring to see it. And that's kind of, what kind of changed my mindset as well.
Yeah, especially because I had never taken the training in the summer that seriously.
And because we were in long distance for all of our relationship, I've never experienced him training that much, like while we were living together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Because before it was like he would train on his own because he was living in San Jose and I was living back in Canada, so I never really got to witness it.
And there's one thing I want to say about this too, is sometimes the margin for improvement requires such a significant amount of time. And like say this, like if you train 20 hours in a week, which is a ton of time, like it's not like if you trained 40 hours in a week you would get double as good. And I think a lot of people sometimes lose that. Is like, honestly, the most important thing that you and I have probably ever learned is like just a little bit every day.
Quality over quantity too. Is
so much more valuable than like being super all in one day and then like taking a couple weeks
days,
or whatever. Is like if you can just consistently have that little bit by bit progress, then it ultimately will pay off massively.
Yeah, definitely. So leading into our next segment, which is basically the shift and how I became a quote-unquote athlete. I don't know if I would consider myself an athlete. However, I've adopted...
I would, 100%.
I have adopted, like, many training principles like an athlete. Yeah,
I think I think anyone who competes is an athlete.
I guess so, yes. So, the turning point. So, like I said, I did this Hyrox race in Dallas. And that was the first time that I have ever experienced any sort of competition. Other than that Deca Fit, but that was just like something casual, and like we're not talking about that because that was rough. But that wasn't as intense as the Hyrox. It was so completely different. It was such a different...
Yeah, we did this little... So Kendall, the same person who got us into Hyrox, told us about this Deca event, which is very similar to a Hyrox, but there was no running. It was just a strong, and... so
it was just stations.
It was just stations, and there was 10 of them. And it was done under 15 minutes. And I think like it gave us like a little tease of this like obstacle course type of community that likes to do these kind of hybrid style events. And definitely not as well run or done as
Hyrox, yeah. It's not
to
as
the magnitude,
professional.
to the professionalism of Hyrox, but still a cool experience because I think that's what kind of like woke you up. You're like, oh,
That's what it feels like to be embarrassed and not even finish remotely as close as to what anyone else around your age is.
is that, how did you know that though? Did you look at like a spreadsheet?
I think on the leaderboard I was like last place.
No. No, I don't
Okay,
remember
anyways.
that. But anyway.
Keep in mind, guys, like this summer, it was really hard summer for me because I had just gone through some hormonal changes. I think I went like back on birth control. I gained a lot of weight. My training was just like not where I wanted it to be. So like at this point in time, I was just confused like with my body, and also just like then trying to start right into running, and like it was just like a shock kind of. So I wasn't too confident back then. However, back to the turning point, which kind of just what made me take fitness more seriously was, excuse me, after we did Hyrox Dallas. And like I said, I had never run before. It was my first time ever experiencing this fitness race. And the atmosphere was so interesting, and obviously it was the hardest thing I ever did. I remember after I finished that race, I told Calvin, I was like, my knees are messed. Like I couldn't walk for days after. I was in so much pain. This was like when I had first started running. So my longest run before the Hyrox race was probably 6 kilometers, which is not like I've never even run 8 kilometers, which is the distance of the race. So obviously I didn't prepare for it well. Didn't have enough time to train. However, it was a big learning opportunity for me, and that's when I realized that I wanted to be better, and I was going to keep working on myself, because that feeling of not doing as well as other people, that was like the first taste of what losing felt like to me. Not necessarily losing, because it's not like a direct like who wins who loses in terms of like the non-elites.
Do you feel like it was more internal kind of thing, or like almost an external embarrassment kind of thing, like you wanted to do better? What was the bigger driving factor?
It was both.
Yeah.
I was honestly just like a little embarrassed because everyone around me was finishing the pro at like less than an hour 30 minutes. I was finishing the open in an hour and 45 minutes. So it was just like a little embarrassing, but honestly, that was the turning point. And ever since then, fast forward to when I moved back to Canada, I looked into CrossFit and I joined a CrossFit gym. And that completely changed my life and my outlook on things as well. Just because of the community, the people that you surround yourself with. It is just so completely different than a commercial gym that I can't even explain, and you have to go and experience it yourself. And I've said this before, I think, and I'll say it again. Group fitness classes is just something that you have to experience. And in terms of making athletic progress, like I just think that's where a lot of people will thrive. And this CrossFit gym, it was just great. The people that I was surrounded with and everything, it had the sense of community, but it also had a little sense of competition as well, because when we did the workouts in a class, there would be a lifting portion and then a daily WOD. And in every WOD, it would be like whoever can finish first kind of thing. It would be like an AMRAP and whoever finishes first or whatever. Sometimes the workouts weren't laid out that way, and it would just be like go as the clock goes, and then you record your amount of rounds or whatever. But it was always interesting because they'd go around the room and be like, okay, what's your time, or what's your score? What's your score? What's your score? And it was a very public thing. And when I first started CrossFit, obviously I wasn't great at it because I hadn't done it before. So it was interesting to be, immersed into that, where like everyone publicly knows whether you did good or bad or just in between, right? So joining CrossFit kind of really helped me understand what it was like to want to work towards bettering yourself every day. And yeah, I guess that was just kind of the turning point. And in terms of social media and stuff, I feel like the times have changed now and people care more about definitely just training for performance and stuff. And I just feel like sharing my journey is like something that I just want to share, because I feel like if I can inspire people to that they can be better starting from nothing, then like that's just
and I think
I
one of the things about like finding the right gym, which we've kind of talked about before, is like you can go to a bad gym or you're not meshing with the community, and you can pretty quickly just decide
that also happened to
that
me
you can
once.
move on. And I think you experienced that, and I've noticed that too, just like bouncing between different gyms in my life.
You just have to find your
it
own
only takes
spot.
one person to kind of leave you a sour taste.
Yes.
And even though there's a lot of great coaches, there's a lot of bad ones. It's unfortunate, but yeah, I think one of the interesting things in fitness and social media too is there's sometimes a polarizing voice on social media that kind of negatively looks down on other types of fitness. And it's just sad because like any person, anybody that like goes out of their way to put down other styles of fitness is just so ironic, because it's like that's, you've completely lost the point. And like if someone's doing something unsafe, that's different, but like to think that CrossFit is better than Hyrox or that sort of thing is just kind of like, you're just wasting.
We've noticed recently there's just been a lot of hate on Hyrox.
And what's funny is Hyrox is the type of like metcon, metabolic conditioning workout that you would see in something like a very long CrossFit workout. Like it could have, before Hyrox existed, you could have seen something like Hyrox in a CrossFit competition easily.
But this is the thing though that I don't think a lot of people understand before they start hating on it, right? So CrossFit, I guess overall you could call it a sport. But when it comes to the CrossFit Games and the CrossFit Open, there is so much variability, and the workouts every year are going to be so completely different. So obviously, it's just a completely different feeling, right? Hyrox is a sport. Like, it is a sport. And what we don't understand is the fact that people are like, oh, it's so repetitive and so boring and like blah blah blah. That's why we don't want to be affiliated with Hyrox, because it's boring. Well, soccer is a sport, football is a sport. Well, is that boring?
And like
it's the same thing every time.
And even not even those sports, like people run the 1500 meter, they run 3.5 laps around a track. Like, well, what's not boring about that?
Yeah.
Like, they train their lives for that stuff. And so it is ironic, because you're right. It's just because I do think there's a bit of like, people just want to stir up a little bit of just controversy, and it's just sad because it's like whatever.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, after that first Hyrox race that I did, I definitely felt the urge to be better, but I also developed this feeling that I didn't want to be just average anymore. And if you've done a Hyrox race before or anything similar and you can relate to me, it can be a very common feeling. It's just now developing like a fear of being average, and now you want to work towards something and be better at something.
Do you think it was the fear of being average, or more like kind of tired and bored of the way you were training, or like you saw something in this that was different? Does that make sense?
I think that first of all, I was bored of bodybuilding, I guess, but it was more just the fact that like this was something new,
Yeah.
This was something new. This was
What
something
about
exciting,
what
and
about
it's
the
an opportunity to become a better version of myself.
yeah? And
And I
I
just
think
didn't want to
I don't
just
know.
be average
I also
anymore.
feel like there was a couple things though that like we haven't even talked about this as well. As like you were doing F45 workouts occasionally.
Yeah,
And I think you liked the way those felt.
I
And I
did.
think like putting yourself in those kind of like high intensity sessions where you're like, I either like this or I really don't. And you didn't have to run, you know what I mean, in an
Yeah.
F45 class.
Mhm.
And then there was also just like the people that you saw involved in those sports, like that you're like, I kind of want to be like
I
them.
want to be
Yeah,
like them.
yeah.
And it was just more of like a motivation to want to be like them and live a lifestyle like them.
Yes.
Because to be honest, back home, there was just a lot of people that just go to the gym to go to the gym and train to build your glutes. And it's just like, it's not very common, especially in my hometown, to be training for performance
Hmm.
other than the CrossFit gyms. But even then, I just feel like that's completely different than, mixing in CrossFit, Hyrox, running half marathons and marathons. It's just completely different. And I think when I started adopting this athlete mentality, I feel like I changed as a person, and these hard training sessions that I've put myself through in the last year, 2 years, have allowed me to come face to face with how bad do you want it.
Yeah, I think what you noticed too was, and a lot of people don't go in the right direction when they face like how bad do you want it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like you realized that there was levels to the sport. There was levels to fitness, and it excited you to be better. And I think a lot of people either they get discouraged or they're not very resilient. And I think that's
Yeah.
like the most important part of like when you go into these things, if you leave them knowing that you can do more, it's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is an interesting thing because it just reminded me of what we were kind of talking about is there are people who sometimes don't train as hard as they can or they don't give their full effort because it gives them an excuse
Yeah.
to have more potential. And I'm wondering like what do you think about that style? Because I think it's a little bit like it's almost like playing it safe.
Playing it safe, yeah.
But I don't think it's going to help you grow. I think sometimes helping you grow is like being a little scared of your goals
I think,
and
yeah.
really kind of working really hard for something, and if you fail then you go back to what you could have done differently.
Exactly,
and
yeah.
do that because I think that's like the number one
and
thing.
I think that's like what's going to happen to me in this block leading up to Hyrox Brisbane is, to be honest with you, I haven't been 100% completely on top of my training plan. And even Calvin was saying today that he's a little bit worried for me because I don't know if I'm going to achieve the goal that I set out for myself. But when it comes to the day, I'm going to push myself as hard as I can.
Right.
And we'll see if it pays off or not. And if
And-
it doesn't, then I will know for my own sake that clearly playing it safe is just not an option when you want to reach a goal.
And this is why I think having someone who can keep you accountable is just the number one thing.
Definitely.
It's like I think the way I train and the reason I'm so confident is because of the consistency with like the days. I don't miss days. And if I do, it's because I know the rest was more important than the actual training.
Right.
And I think just watching you and knowing maybe where you think you are at this point, I think you're still ready to do that because I know you have it in you. But I also know that there's things that I would need to do with you to get there.
Yeah.
And it's up to you. It's up to you. If you don't want to do it, then you didn't want it bad enough. And that goes right back to what we
like
just
I
said.
yeah, it's how bad do you want it?
Yeah.
And I'm still at the point where this whole thing of competing is still very new to me. And maybe in a few years down the road, I will want it more. But right now, I just want to be better than last time.
Yeah.
That's all I care about.
And I want to say something to this, how bad do you want it? Because like it keeps reminding me, because it's this mental side of training and competing that I think you come face to face with it at some level. And I was doing my interval workouts happen every Wednesday evening, and not this past Wednesday, but the Wednesday before, I was doing a track session, and the paces that I was hitting were very aggressive. And I remember
almost like you were worried that you wouldn't be able to hit it?
Not even capable of hitting my paces. Like it just, that hanging on feeling. Yeah. But
that's the worst
teetering.
Feeling.
Yeah. And no one likes that.
Yeah.
And so it was an 800 meter, then a 600 meter, and a 400 meter with some rest in between. And then it repeated 5 times. And I remember finishing the 400 meter after the first round. And I had a long day at work, and I had these negative voices inside my head so loud that I could give every reason why I should just stop. Why I could throw in the towel. I had negative voices in my head so loud telling me that I was feeling little injuries. I was like, my that voice in my head was telling me, oh, your ankle doesn't feel too good. Oh, your knee might, you know what I mean? You're running, you're hitting these paces, you're in the middle of it, and you have that voice inside your head, and it's trying to find escape. It's trying to give you a way out, an excuse. It's trying to give you these avenues. And I think the most important thing that I've ever taken from that is never, and this is very hard to do, quit. Because when you quit on yourself, you will be forever, or not forever, you will be for a while mentally weak.
Yeah.
Mentally weak, because anytime things get hard, your brain will justify that you can take the easy way out. And so just finish. Even if you don't hit your pace, just finish. I promise you, it's the most important thing, is just finish. Because when you say you're going to do something and you stick to it, gosh, there is so much dopamine and there's so much relief that you're proud of yourself. And when you let yourself down, it is so mentally so heavy, and it will weigh on your shoulders. And I think that's the most important thing, is like, I have had some days where just the voice inside my head is you can't shake it off, and it's the workout just feels hard and it feels heavy.
Yeah.
And I hope anyone who's listening to this can relate to this and understand that when you get to these points where you want to quit and you see some dark thoughts, the people who end up quitting, and I've been there before, I've seen it in rowing. I thought I was in the shape I needed to be to hit the goal I wanted to hit in my second year, and I wasn't at that fitness level yet. I kind of had false confidence, and it broke me, because I realized that it wasn't, like, it was almost not, I wasn't capable. Yeah. And after that,
or you just didn't put in the work.
Well, after that, I also had to like pull back significantly and restart from something much slower. Yeah. And so that's like one of the biggest things in terms of stacking confidence, is being able to have these like small bricks that you're laying, so that when you're right on the edge, that the mental side doesn't psych you out. Mm-hmm. That was a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's so important. Like, just the mental side, it affects everybody.
Yeah, for sure. So let's quickly talk about the biggest challenges of shifting from just working out casually to now competitive training for performance. So for me, honestly, in this whole learning journey, learning how to recover was probably the hardest thing. How to recover to be able to see progress. And that includes just getting enough sleep, learning that sometimes you just have to fit those double sessions in order to see the progress. And obviously it's going to take time, and people could judge you for it. Why are you working out so much, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's because I have a goal. I set a goal for myself. Yeah, I'm going to have to work out twice a day sometimes. How does that affect you in any way? It shouldn't. Why you gotta hate on me? That was really hard, honestly. More just like the negativity around it.
Especially, I think people also really feel that sentiment when they maybe played sports. A lot of people played sports, but like they go from this like university to adult life, and it's like, why would you care about fitness? You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you're the highest level. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's hard for people to relate to that.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
And yeah, the same thing about like drinking. Like I don't go out drinking on the weekends, and people probably judge me for that as well. And it's just like, I have priorities, and I choose not to do it because I know that it's going to negatively impact my performance the next day. So why would I set myself up for failure when I can actively choose not to do that? So that was a big challenge. And another big challenge was sacrificing the aesthetics and what I enjoyed doing, which was bodybuilding at that time. And although I did have a mindset shift into wanting to train for performance, there is something about no longer chasing aesthetics that can mentally just kind of impact you, because your body will change and you won't look the same that you used to, and people could notice, whether that's in a positive or a negative way. So yeah, those were some big challenges, like just losing overall like glute definition, because I'm not hip thrusting 3 times a week now. You know what I mean? So I
don't. I think a lot of guys, I think it's difficult for guys to understand the pressures of just how body and just how just the way you look. I think you don't realize how important, and I think it is important for guys as well. I just think women are very often like in bikinis and very like sexualized in those ways, where it's like it's very obvious when someone's like kind of not maybe fitting like a certain stereotype of how like an attractive woman would look. Yeah. But I do think that just being able to kind of understand, like if working out is like a key part of your own happiness or your ability to like operate and function at the high level, then you need to keep that in your day or in your routine, because it will set everything up. And ultimately for us, it's even more important than that, because it's our passion, it's our life, and it's like actively training for a goal gives us purpose and and it's easily aligned with kind of what we want and what we want to get out of it. And I think it's interesting because there was something I was reading recently about how like a couple hundred years ago, nobody would just sign up for marathons, right? If you can imagine a couple hundred years ago, and like even like 100 years ago during the wars and stuff, like it was less common. Is that even a thing? It was less common. Like people didn't do this stuff because
imagine them running a marathon in their like pilgrim pants.
But imagine like in your little village, imagine in your village saying like, yeah, like I'm going to go run a marathon. Well, no one would ever say that, because you have to provide and like save your energy to survive. Like I'm talking about hundreds of years ago.
The times have just completely changed.
And so I think what the reality of these events and the suffering and the challenge is because life has become so soft, and because we live such a privileged and like soft life, that humans nowadays seek out these challenges to
Make themselves feel better.
make us feel alive,
Yeah.
and make us feel like we've endured something that it makes life more, it makes it more interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to realize, is like, this stuff didn't exist a couple hundred years ago because life just was a lot harder a few hundred years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's just an interesting way of looking at it.
Definitely. So yeah, when it comes to competing and training and supporting each other, I feel like this average athlete relationship has kind of just changed slightly, for better or for worse. When it comes to like running, we used to go on runs together quite a bit, and it would just be kind of Cal just like there for support, obviously, because I'd be running at a pace much slower. But because we are so serious in a training block now, there's just no way we can run together anymore, because his paces are so completely different than mine that it's just like he just needs to do what is actually his zone 2, which is my like way too fast for me. So there's just no way that that's going to work. So that's just hard, because that used to be time we would spend together in terms of quality time, and now it's like we just have to run on our own.
And
also,
we find small ways around this, though, which is like a slight alternative is like we go to a place where we can run around a grass track at the moment.
True.
And so it's not like we don't see each other, but we're definitely not together. So like Tash and I will run to this track, which takes 2 kilometers, and then run around it like at very different paces.
Yeah.
Like different like I'll be on one side, she'll be on the other.
Yeah.
And then after we hit whatever we need to hit, then we'll run back. And at least,
but we're
like,
not beside each
yeah.
other, and it's just we're not even near each other. So.
But you're right. It's like the fact that
Yeah.
I think we've grown to that. I think it's tough sometimes it's tough to accept that.
Yeah.
But I think it ultimately is just the reality of sometimes like that's just the way it is.
And I do miss like going on runs by the beach together and whatnot, but at the end of the day, like it is kind of just on me. Like if I can't keep up with him, that's on me, right? And I'm not gonna make him slow down. You could flip it the other way around and say, why wouldn't you slow down for your girlfriend? But I truly think it's just like I'm not gonna make him slow down.
Yeah, you shouldn't. No one should ever do
Yeah.
that. Yeah, it doesn't really help unless it's like your birthday or something, then it's like
I guess.
yeah, I think one of the things that we've recognized in training and like how serious we take it and stuff is like the difference. Like some people like to some people like to have a relationship with their partner where it's like a coach and an athlete relationship where some people
our roommates are blasting Funky Town. Funky Town, won't you take me down?
I was wondering what you were laughing about because I was talking. I couldn't hear it.
No, because I can't focus.
Yeah. So
sorry.
So that's funny. So some people, no, I know exactly where I'm going with this. Some people have this relationship with their significant other where it's like a coach and an athlete, where you look up to your partner as like your guide, and you're going to look to them for advice and be kind of at mercy to what they think is best for you. And then there's the opposite where you kind of clash in that sense where you think you know best and you do what you want to do because you're going to train a certain way, and the other person does the same thing. I don't think one's right or wrong, because I think ultimately it depends on so many variables and like what your background is and your experience and how it started. And even if you're both competing versus one is maybe just literally a coach and one is literally the athlete. And I think of Tia Toomey and her husband, for that example, is like he's been her coach forever, and that's the relationship. Mm-hmm. Whereas like us, I think
we're both just training
we both are training, yeah. And we do our things. And like personally, when I'm doing a hard workout, like I might want Tash to say, like I might appreciate her watching or her being supportive and like being there. But when I'm like suffering and stuff, like when I think of Tash, like I think of like safety and just comfort and like just not stress. And so when I'm going through stress, I don't also like to feel that sort of comfort.
Pressure.
No, I don't want to feel that comfort.
Oh.
I want to feel like the people who are talking to me are people who maybe are at the same intensity level as me, rather than like someone who's just like at a calm level, or just like supportive of me. Does that make sense at all? I think it's hard for me to explain exactly what it takes, but I just think there's some people that either get what motivates you, and some people who might not necessarily do that for you. And I think we both kind of know that like we need to be very careful with what we say, because it's just like it might do more damage than good.
So and there's also just balance between support and competition. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like you just need to get to know what works and what doesn't, knowing when to push each other and knowing when to back off. And sometimes we don't want to be pushed by each other. Like I know Calvin's too intense for me. Like I just don't want him to be yelling at me at the gym to keep going and stuff, because it's too intense. I'd rather let myself just motivate myself, because I know I'm not going to quit. That's
what I mean, is like I think because our intensity levels are just different, and that's the reality of things. Like when I watch her train and when she watches me train, we don't relate on that sense of like how we approach it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what's important to realize with your partners. It's just you might operate a little differently with how you motivate
and you don't
yourself.
Always need to be on the same level. And what we've learned about each other through sport is that Calvin has a quite intense personality, and it took us years to kind of figure this out and learn how to live with it in a good way.
That sounds so bad.
No, I didn't mean it like that. It's just like learning how to work out together now that we're living together, not in long distance anymore. Mm-hmm. When you work out, you are a very intense person. I'm not. Mm-hmm. So that kind of just clashes, and it's been a journey just trying to figure out what would be the best way to, work out together at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think it definitely takes time, especially if like you're in a situation where one person is taking it much more serious than another. I think that's exactly kind of where we've gone. Is like I definitely take my training just plain simple, more serious, and that's just the reality of kind of how I need to mentally prepare.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna pull this card, but I'm gonna say it anyway. But I'm a woman. And we go through different phases in our menstrual cycle, and sometimes some weeks, multiple weeks.
I thought you were going somewhere else with
plural. That. No. I'm just saying, like, sometimes, like, some weeks in the month or in my whatever, just motivation's not there. It's not there. I don't feel great. I don't feel good. And it's just, I don't have that same, like, motivation and drive as you do. Mm. And I feel like men sometimes forget that, or they just don't understand it because they've never experienced it.
They definitely don't understand that. I think
I know my own body, and like I know when I need to slow down and value those rest days, mm-hmm. and just like be in tune with my own body, because I know if I push myself that A, I'm going to injure myself, or B, have a mental breakdown. Yeah.
100%. I think men, it's definitely different.
It's so different.
Most men, from my point of view, get caught up in overdoing it and kind of pushing themselves towards some mental burnout or injuries because they're constantly in this like comparing, I need to be here, I need to like, and then they get discouraged because of like kind of training in a way that like leads them just to being so burnt out and sick of it. You know what I mean? So. That's from my point of view that a lot of men
and I don't want to like I didn't want that to come across as an excuse, but what I really meant by that was like maybe one day I wouldn't feel good, so I would swap my heavy, like very intense interval run for a zone 2 bike. It's not that I'm slacking off and like just literally not working out that day. It's just like some days you will just need to make that switch, and you just need to be okay with that. And I just want other people to kind of understand that as well, that it's okay to just kind of listen to your body.
100%.
Yeah. Because I do take training seriously, but when it comes to Calvin's level of performance, it's completely different. So yeah, definitely high level performance requires a lot of focus, and sometimes it can come across selfish, especially for people that are training in Hyrox and stuff.
Yeah, I think when you start to realize like the sacrifices and the choices that you need to make internally and individually, that it can definitely come across to other people like you're kind of continuously choosing your own progress, your own development over them, and it definitely can be lonely or isolating sometimes, but ultimately I think it comes from a good place, or it comes from a place where like you understand that your goals they're not gonna just happen by themselves. They require lots of work.
Definitely.
And they aren't gonna just become because you wish them or hope them to happen. And so just the amount of time and sacrifice that it takes to commit and stick through the process, and mentally and physically, that's kind of the reality of kind of sometimes it feels perhaps selfish, but I think it's what might be what you need to do rather than what someone else wants you to be.
Right. Yeah. So what would we tell our younger selves about balancing these different lifestyles? First thing I would say is that patience is key. So if one person in your relationship is deeply invested in a sport like Hyrox and the other isn't, expecting an instant understanding is not realistic. And I feel like just looking back, we would have reassured ourselves that it takes time to align lifestyles, if that makes sense. It just takes a lot of time to kind of truly understand. And the second thing would be that it's okay to not understand. Because if we could go back, we'd remind ourselves that it's normal to kind of just feel disconnected from something that you've never experienced. And the key to that is just keeping an open mind.
What do you mean by that? It's not okay to get it?
It's not it's
okay not to get it at first. But what do you mean to get what?
It's okay to not understand how invested you could be in a sport and how selfish it could be.
It's okay to understand that you might have differences between you and your partner.
It's okay to not understand.
Yes, 100%. And I think it just takes time because you'll approach things from different ways, and ultimately it'll most negatively affect you if you try to change one another.
Yeah. And that leads me to my last point, which is compromise without resentment. And if you were in a relationship that is somewhat similar, there could be probably moments of tension around training schedules and spending quality time with each other and actually balancing your true relationship. And I feel like if we could go back in time, I would definitely just tell ourselves to communicate more openly instead of just assuming that Calvin would know how I felt about it, kind of thing. I feel like it's common to like resent someone for prioritizing something over you in a relationship, and I feel like there needs to be compromise without resentment, if that makes sense.
Yes, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
100%.
So, how would you encourage someone to train like an athlete without forcing it?
Well, I think the best way is to take the same approach that you took, which was surround yourself in a community, whether it's something like a group fitness type of style, so whether it's CrossFit or functional fitness or something like that, so that you can kind of just be surrounded by people who are involved in that kind of style of training. I think that is just like the first step, but I think the second part that's attached to that is just signing up for a race that you feel is going to challenge you. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon, whatever it may be, just like a obstacle course. Sign up for something that's going to excite you mm-hmm. and challenge you, and you're going to have to create a plan and prepare. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the best things I heard recently was there's a difference between preparation and planning, because planning assumes that things are going to go exactly how you expect them to go.
Yeah.
Preparation is planning, but also when it is unexpected. Yeah. And it is one of the most important things, like being prepared for something also means when things don't go the way you expect them to, that you're also ready for that. Whereas if you've just planned something, as soon as something goes wrong, right? As soon as like things don't go the way you expect them to go, then your whole plan you're in trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's one of the most important ways to view preparation.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So one last thing we want to touch on is that we need to understand each other's goals, even if they look a little bit different. I feel like that is a key thing. And respecting different definitions of success. So, for example, Calvin's definition of success is just winning, getting first place in Hyrox.
No, and that's not true.
Okay, sorry. I take that back.
I don't know why you would say that.
I thought that that's what your definition of success would be for this race.
Winning.
Yes.
I think I'm going to win.
You know why I thought that? Because when we did Hyrox Toronto, like, you clearly made that, like, your goal. Like, and that was your definition of success. And if you didn't get first place, you would have been really bummed out. And you did get first place in your age group.
I want to clarify this. I train to win, but I don't expect to win.
Okay, I understand.
Okay, so that's very different. Like, I don't, like, my definition of success is not to win.
Right.
I train to win. I always approach a race as I'm training to win, but my definition of success is not winning, because I do have a goal.
I don't mean success overall. I just meant success in the sport.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like, you're saying, like, ultimately, like, if I win the race, then I've succeeded. Like, is that not your goal? I see. Yeah. Yes. I want to be the best.
Yes, exactly.
I do want to be the best.
And that's what I mean by respecting different definitions of success, because my definition of success is just to be better than I was the last time. And that's definitely not going to be winning.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's funny because I know people will listen to this. And I know Nick Bear says that he has the same viewpoint as you. And the reason, and this is a little controversial, the reason I don't believe that being better than yourself is ultimately the best way to look at things, or the way I look at things, because I have seen your point of view. It's like, man, like if I could just be better than I was yesterday, I'd be super happy. The reason why I'm very honest about that's not how I view is my own ability is only relative to other people's.
Yeah.
And if you looked at yourself in the mirror and if say you were at the top, you were the best, whatever you were at right now was the best, I do see how you could say, like, I just want to see how much better I could get. But I think what comparison does sometimes is it allows you to see what you are capable of.
Yeah.
And so I use the comparison of other people who I think are far superior athletes and better athletes than me, or maybe at a better what's the right word? At a higher level of the sport.
Yeah.
As inspiration to test my limits and be able to get as close as I can to them.
But what happens if you don't reach what you said you were going to do?
So that's the difference, I think, is like I train day to day like with full of happiness because I'm doing the best I can.
Right.
And so
but then that also relates back to my view, which is just doing the best you can.
And so I do, and that is like day to day, I do the best I can. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to the race
day,
yeah, I want to do what I can to win.
Yes.
Because that's what excites me. Mm-hmm. Is if I showed up on race day and just thought, oh, I'll just do the best I can, it's not as
exciting.
It's not as exciting. Yeah. It's not as motivating. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately I've grown up and I've lived to compete. And I love the competition. I love the variables, the mental side, the physical side, the sport of competing with other people. And that comes with losing. And I've lost so many times in my life. And I think people, and I really want to drill this because it's important, is like I learn far more when I lose than when I've won. And like I will accept like losing because it is more fuel for the fire. Mm-hmm. It's more fuel for the fire because then I'm going to continue to train harder.
Exactly.
And I think people who win too often or get too comfortable,
ego,
start to get less motivated.
Yeah.
And start to get a little bit. Yeah. And so I don't know if I fully maybe explained that as clear as I could, but I think
it was pretty clear.
I think I can get into maybe more detail at another time if I think about it a bit more. But yeah, I think sometimes the idea, this is what I want people to think about, is like sometimes the idea of like, I'm not going to compare myself to anybody isn't actually a reality of life. Is like you might tell yourself that. Everybody is constantly comparing themselves to other people.
Yeah.
Subconsciously, just to kind of see where you're at. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's how fashion evolves. That's what other people do, right? And that's just life.
Yeah.
And so we'll see how that evolves, and ultimately whatever will bring you inspiration and joy and happiness is going to be more important.
Right.
And I think I don't think all my happiness is tied in my result. But I will say, back to the Eddie Hall thing, if you remember, or I didn't even think I mentioned this Eddie Hall thing, which was he did a 1,000-pound deadlift. And for him to mentally get to a spot where he could lift 1,000 pounds and set the world record when this was, he had to channel some fight or flight and some dark thoughts. And for him to get there, he had to really truly believe that bad things were going to happen to him and his family and things like that. And so I think sometimes I kind of like tapping in. I like to tap into some of those primal instincts.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking recently, and it's so silly. People could listen to this and be like, well, you're fucking crazy. But like, imagine if you were at the 100 wall balls left in a race and someone said, if you don't drop this ball, I'll pay you $1 million. Mm-hmm. Are you going to drop the ball?
No.
No, there's no fucking way.
Literally.
Like, think about that. Like, there's no way. Like, you would go to a place so more mentally messed up. Like, you would do anything. So why don't you? It's because you give yourself a way to get yourself out of it. And I think it's so important to, I hope that hit home with people.
Yeah.
Is like, if the reward was so great that there would be no damn way. You know what I mean? And I think that's what people, when they're fighting for that first place position, that's what it feels like. Winning the championship is literally like the $1 million, right? That's why they're willing to go to that place mentally. And I don't think you shouldn't go there every day. But I think it allows us to understand what humans are capable when it really matters. Yeah. That's why mothers lift cars off their kids when they're burning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I hope that really, really hit home with people.
Which leads us to our free speed. I already know what you're going to say for your free speed.
Tell me what I'm going to say.
When you're in a Hyrox and you're doing the 100 wall balls, the free speed
is so
to
true.
Imagine your daughter being smushed by a truck.
No, and I think there's two ways. We'll give people two avenues. Is if you like to go a little dark, then yeah, think of someone maybe who's going to hurt your family, and this is the only way to save them, right? The gun to your head, and you're going to save yourself, or gun to your daughter's head, you're going to save yourself.
That's
the
free
opposite.
Speed.
The opposite is you're money hungry, and you're like, I will receive life-changing money if I do this. And I think that's the positive versus negative side of things, that different people will rather different things.
Yeah. Well, my free speed's a little bit different.
Tell us.
I think my free speed is that encouragement doesn't necessarily mean pressure. And I know on my social media I share my fitness journey and everything, and I'm trying to inspire people, as many people as possible, to get into this hybrid training, whether that's just like running more, just diversifying their weekly workouts into whatever that is, swimming, running, cycling, weightlifting, Hyrox specifically. But encouragement doesn't mean pressure. And I feel like leading by example is more powerful than forcing it. And I think growing at your own pace is super, super important. So if you can just remember that is my free speed.
Yeah, I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I love where we went with this episode today. I hope you could take something valuable from it. We enjoy filming these episodes, even though we're going through some kind of difficult times. Just
technological difficulties, like extreme technological difficulties.
There's definitely
to the point where we've had to re-record this podcast like multiple times. And it's quite exhausting.
And we change it every time. We want to give you guys the most organic and authentic version of ourselves, so it's not scripted at all. And so we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Ultimately, your guys' support will help us to continue to make upgrades and make better camera quality and better audio quality. And that's the goal with this, is being able to ultimately give you guys the best podcast experience. And so we enjoy doing this. I know at the end of every episode, Tash and I feel like this sense of like joy that like we could ultimately bring in a quality in a good episode for you guys to listen to.
For sure. Because I don't know if I've ever talked about this before. Sorry, quickly before we finish this episode. I grew up, not when I was a kid, but more when I was in high school, university. Podcasts and YouTube, that is my safe place. And just listening to people talk and share stories and whatever it is, it's just my safe place. And ultimately that's why we want to provide a form of entertainment for you guys, is because I valued it so much to the point where it changed my life completely. And I also just enjoy the process of creating, whether that's, YouTube videos or this podcast. But yeah, it's been a journey, but we're learning and it's a process, and we do appreciate your continued support, and we'd love if you guys, commented or left a 5-star review. We would definitely appreciate that. And yeah, we just hope we can make this better and better with every episode that we create. So yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Free Speed Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye guys.